joined now by the Director General of the Budget Office, Ben Akabueze, and the Deputy Chairman of the Senate Committee on Loans, Senator Bima Enagi. Gentlemen, thanks for your time. And let's quickly start from you, the DG, Ben Akabueze. Many Nigerians are concerned, and there's also been a report about hitting the ceiling on our borrowing. Take us through the actual state of what's going on with this administration.
Well, Suleiman, I'm not sure what you mean by what's going on with this administration. You'll have to be more specific in terms of what you like me to speak to. What exactly?
I think it's good, I think, that you've asked that question. But again, I was specific about hitting the borrowing limit, the threshold, and some Nigerians will want some kind of explanation on that.
Well, the budget for 2023, which was passed into law, makes provision for total borrowings of 6.9 trillion naira, of which 6.4 trillion is from domestic sources. I'm talking about new borrowings, and half a trillion naira from foreign sources. To the best of my knowledge, total borrowings year to date, is still in the neighborhood of 2 trillion naira.
All right, let's come to our guest in the studio, Senator Bima Enagi. As the Chairman Senate Committee on Loans, there are obviously concerns about the sort of non-essential spending plans of this outgoing administration and the role that the National Assembly should have played or should be playing in sort of curtailing these what people have called excessive spending, wayward spending, last-minute unusual spending. What are your thoughts on the concerns of Nigerians?
Thank you very much for your question and your comments. For me, I believe that government is continuous. The fact that this present government tenure will lapse 29th of May 2023 does not mean that when they have vital issues, especially the budget that is passed, the 2023 budget that is passed contains subsidy up to June, but beyond June, from July, there is no provision for subsidy payment. Therefore, it was necessary for government to take the steps that they are taking. I personally believe that the National Assembly will look into the government request. We will put it into debate. Members will pass their comments very well, and the right decision will be taken at the right time.
I come back to Lagos because I was going to ask, because the good thing is that you're here, Mr. Akabueze, and Nigerians would like, clarification. Your name has been making the rounds quite, lately about Nigeria exceeding its borrowing limit. I come back to it. Perhaps if you can make more lucid what you mean by that in clear, numbers.
No, I never made any such statement. In my interaction with the members-elect of the National Assembly during the induction program, I took them through the federal government budget process and pertinent issues. And one of the core issues I averted their mind to is the need for us to focus more keenly on the revenue side of the budget. There are two sides to the budget. There's the revenue side and the expenditure side. In the past, the bulk of the time, reviewing the budget has been focused on the expenditure side and not, in my opinion, not enough attention paid to the revenue side of the budget. The consequence is that, it's a contributory factor. It's not the only factor responsible for that, is that our revenue performance has been, weaker than we would like it to see. We're not generating enough revenues to support this, the scale of our spending. Even the National Assembly's oversight function has been traditionally focused on expenditure. And when we fall short on revenues, with the high levels of non-discretionary expenditure that we have to incur, the net effect is that there's a resort to borrowing. And I made the point that when you look at the debt stock in relation to the GDP, it will look healthy. However, when you look at the debt service to revenue ratio, and essentially debt is service from revenues, I made the point that we were basically testing limits that were not sustainable, and therefore that we need to break and focus on the revenue side of the budget.
A shock to see that you actually quoted out of context at that induction. Very quickly, before we delve in, we'll come back to Senator Nagy. Has your office, tried to? Has your office tried to correct the erroneous headlines?
No, I mean, we haven't bothered because in the past, I mean, doesn't do anything. Even when you issue rejoinders, the rejoinders don't get as much prominence as the story. There's a fixation around the issue of borrowing, and so I had my presentation was lasted 45 minutes, and there was a Q&A session of 30 minutes, and at the end of the day, this was just a new part of what I had to say, but obviously this was the portion that appealed to the media men, and I've seen some of very misleading headlines. But as I said, the advice of my communication officers is not to bother doing any rejoinders.
All right, now back to the senator who's with us here. Nigeria's outgoing President Muhammadu Buhari has requested an approval of a fresh $800 million loan from the World Bank, which the federal government says is to cushion the effect of or the impact of the fuel subsidy removal, which may have been suspended now or postponed. And you talk about how government is a continuous, we understand that. But there are so many concerns on the implementation or the operational strategy of this $800 million. You have consequences like when the incoming administration comes in and they have other ideas of how to run this operation, on how to strategize, on how to use these loans. So what are your thoughts on these consequences when people are saying, look, this can just be left. This is a time for this administration to be handing over projects that are not completed yet, Senator?
Yeah, thank you very much for your comments. I believe that the incoming government has a very serious decision to take. Either to go along and sustain the subsidy or to remove the subsidy. The present government believes that the best is for the subsidy to be removed. And you talk to a lot of economists, they will tell you that the best way forward for Nigeria is for subsidy to be removed. We cannot sustain paying subsidy. Nigerians are suffering as a result of the subsidy. The benefit is going to very few people. So this issue has to be addressed. And I think it is the right of the government to take decision. If the incoming government comes in and they believe it's not the best decision, all they need to do is to go back to the National Assembly. If the National Assembly has approved the, approve the $800 million, then government can decide what to do. I strongly believe, personally, I'm not speaking for the National Assembly on this, but I believe that the best thing to do is to address the infrastructural deficit in this country. Distributing $800 million to Nigerians, low-income Nigerians, I don't think that's the best way to go. But then it will be put into debate in the National Assembly, and the best decision will be taken in the interest of this country and Nigerians.
And Mr. Akabueze, quickly here, how much more, space does the country have in terms of borrowing?
Well, that's not a stagnant number, and I can assure you that lenders do their analysis, and no lender gives you, willingly lends to you when they judge that you no longer have, incremental borrowing capacity. So that's a moving number. If as your revenues, for instance, grow, your capacity to borrow increases. As you restructure existing debt, for instance, to pace out the lengthen the tenors, lower your interest rates, it increases your capacity as well to borrow. So it's not something that you put a number to and say that this is, but the Appropriation Act for this year has a hard ceiling on how much we can borrow for this year, and as I said, it's an aggregate of 6.9 trillion naira.
Let's make sense of this quickly here. The award of contract, does that necessarily mean spending money?
Well, you see, between the award of contract and actually paying, it's quite a distance. Under the federal government's Public Procurement Act, the maximum that you can pay in terms of advance payment is 30%. So for many of these contracts that FEC is currently awarding, they're not even likely to get to advance payment before the end of the term of office of this administration, because of the documentation and that goes on, the documentation in government. But if they do get there, that's probably the best that any of them can attain, to get advance payment. And then subsequent payments based on progress payments are based on certificates of work accomplished. The point to be made again is that in the 2023 budget, the aggregate capital expenditure in the 2023 budget is over 5 trillion naira. And so all of this spending is still a fraction of that, and it comes out of what's been approved.
Okay, to Senator Enagi, you're the Deputy Chairman, Senate Committee on Loans. You've heard Ben Akabueze, he says, well, it's still a fraction of what. Is it an understanding among senators and other lawmakers, because you're the representatives of the people?
Can I get you right, please?
No, we're talking about, how worried are you? How much of understanding do you have in the National Assembly, specifically in the Senate, about loans and spendings of the federal government?
Okay, as things are now, just as the Director of Budget had tried to explain, there is no ceiling to some of these things. The most important is the capacity of the government, of the country, to sustain the debt repayment. And I think Nigeria is not in any bad situation. Just as he said, the debt to GDP ratio is about 35% presently, and it could go as high as 55%. Using the benchmark by the World Bank and the IMF. So we are not in a very bad state. The problem we have is the revenue generation. What we are generating, revenue, is not as much as we can. We can improve in that direction. And that is the area I think government needs to focus upon. We need to improve our revenue generation.
Thank you so much, Senator Bima Enagi, Deputy Chairman, Senate Committee on Loans, and also Ben Akabueze, DG Budget Office of the Federation, for joining us tonight.